Hi, my name is Amita Singh. I was responsible for reviewing Chapter 3 of Sidman. So, Chapter 3 is titled Ivory, Laboratory, or Glass House. So, it begins by asking the question, can conduct be analyzed? So, this chapter begins by restating the idea that we cannot predict and manage behaviors. We struggle to work to prepare events that are to come in the future. So, as we consider how to address behavior, we need to reflect on three underlying questions. One, what are people doing and what are they going to do in the future? Two, how do we influence in our own interests? And three, how do we influence at the interest of the greater good? So thinking about things like society. So questions considered can include how can we get political leaders to ensure our success of our country? Will working harder as an employee or someone in work, will that impact their compensation or how much they're paid salary wise? So as we consider the answers to many questions, we must focus on one underlying ideology. So we always are adjusting our behaviors to the demands of the world around us. So we're conforming and potentially being coerced to what societal expectations are. So with the idea in mind, we assume that people, places, and things are under the control of the individual at hand. So as a behavior analyst, our goal is to figure out how to get rid of the control component. So the role of behavior analyst is to find the control and identify it. So Sidman goes on and discusses that as a society, we recognize that behavior can be changed. So on page 52, he states that we use many different methods for changing our own or others' conduct and behavior. So thinking about things like formal education, within the school setting, we hope that we can teach how to demonstrate new abilities, whether that's teaching a skill of how to sit safely and calmly at a desk, and then generalize that skill to other settings, and just practice that skill across the school day. So this is done through teaching how to demonstrate the new abilities. Another place where behavior can be shaped and impacted often is within the family setting. So with set expectations of teaching survival and the ability to function in the world around them, children are taught to work adaptively. So parents will often teach children values or state their expectations of how they want them to function in society overall, and setting a standard for their behaviors and how that's going to impact them daily. Another way is we need to recognize that there are consequences within society. So society has set laws that we recognize are going to elicit a certain response. So, for example, as a driver, I know that by exhibiting inappropriate behaviors, I might receive a consequence. So that might be if I'm driving and speeding in a 30 miles per hour zone and I'm going 60 miles, I might get a ticket. So that's my consequence. So essentially, the next component is building self-control. So some examples of building self-control as a person is you might think about how people manage their day. So, for example, I know that I need to set 5 or 6 alarms to ensure I wake up on time and get myself moving so I get to work on time. So the behavior that I'm trying to adjust and ensure is being met and having control of is being on time to work. Part of that, and going hand in hand, is I also have my agenda book that I use as a place to document important dates, important events, anything I need to be planning ahead to ensure that I'm meeting my scheduling deadlines. So this helps me recognize where and how I need to self-regulate and how I need to plan accordingly. So as we consider what helps us stay accountable for following the rules, we need to also recognize what consequences may be in play if we do not abide by them. So if I come to work late, I may be verbally reprimanded or redirected by my administrative staff, or I could get a write up, or let's say I'm turning in an assignment late, then I might have negative remarks on it and be docked points. Another example would be if I'm speeding because I'm late, I then could receive a ticket. So moving on to the next section of the chapter, it's titled, What Does It Mean to Do an Experiment? So as behavior analysts, we focus on both applied and experimental science. So behavior analysts need to really focus on the ability to just ensure that all experiments are under specific control. So in order to qualify as an experiment, one needs measurement, control, consistency, accuracy, and appropriately defined testing conditions to ensure that the data and information you're collecting is specific and representative of the behaviors that are being recorded. So in the process, one must also be able to recognize how to alter an environment and then return to the original state, which may cause specific results. So within the chapter, there is a really interesting example of how airplanes are tested in isolation in order to really make sure that it is ready for being able to go and work in an uncontrolled environment. So then we move into section 3, titled From Mouse to Mankind. Within this section, Sidman explains the need to isolate the subject and really focus in on the behavior and different variables that may play into a response. So this kind of thinks about the first question one must ask themselves is, what am I going to look for, or what am I looking at? So at that point, you need to be focused on facing validity and focus on the whole picture during an observation and a holistic picture of the subject. So in order to ensure that we are getting valid, we need to repeat experimentation and have clear-cut control variables and definitions. So within the chapter, they talked about the concept, how consequences can shape behavior. So as mentioned on page 63, a child is asking for a cookie. Upon asking for that cookie, the child begins to tantrum, kick, scream, and bite. And then the child is given the cookie, which inherently is reinforcing the child for their negative behaviors and then their tantrum and demands. So essentially, the child is learning that the behavior of tantrums, they're learning that the nonverbal response they'll get is getting a cookie to be reinforced for what they wanted in that moment. Similarly, we need to think about money. So as people in the working environment, we know that money is a key reinforcer for many. So without that reinforcer, would we still go to work every day? So as individuals, we also know that we have to buy things, that, we have bills and things that we need to pay for, and our daily expenses. So without that money and that dangler of a consequence of not having food, shelter, or our basic necessities, it is inherently shaping our behavior to ensure that we are providing appropriate behaviors to ensure that we are getting paid. So the chapter then moves on to discuss consequences and how the world views them. And as a society, we see the term consequence and we always think negative. One expects that if there is a consequence, then there's a negative response to an action. However, one needs to recognize also that every behavior, every action will have a positive or negative consequence. So if you complete your work, you're on task, which is, again, a behavior, then you will receive the positive praise. You'll have positive remarks. You'll have the positive feedback given to you. Versus if you're not completing your work, you'll be redirected. You'll be reminded to do your work. You might lose points on your point sheet and have that response. So the chapter left me with lingering questions of, number one, can we conclude from what we have seen that behavior is determined by consequences. So is behavior really driven by consequences? And how does consequences, negative or positive, really impact the behavior? So they kind of are worded similarly, but are similar questions. Thanks.